In this story, I'm going to tell you how I discovered my husband was quietly selling our home out from under me, and how I turned the very routines he'd used to betray me into the proof that destroyed his plan. But I didn't scream or stage a public humiliation. I collected receipts, screenshots, and one tiny miswritten calendar note, then staged a family meeting with a banker and mediator that froze the transfer and forced the truth into the open. Stay with me, I'll show you the single breadcrumb he left that unraveled everything, and the calm, legal move that became my revenge. My name is Evelyn Hart. I am 34 and I live in Portland, Oregon. For 8 years, my marriage to Mateo defined how I structured my days and dreams. We bought our house together in Northeast Portland when I turned 28. We brewed small batch coffee on Saturday mornings while arguing gently about music, and we promised each other that when my design career found firmer footing, we would start trying for a child. Those were my trust anchors. We weathered Mateo losing his job, and I covered groceries for months while he rebuilt his freelance roster. We had a ritual of making the same awful pasta on Thursdays and drinking cheap Pinot on the porch, and we mapped out a 5-year plan scribbled across the margins of our lease and a shared savings spreadsheet. I believed in him because he knew every loan and dent on our house. He learned the dentist appointment schedule by heart, and he could make me laugh even when I felt small. I trusted him with my mother's medical records when she needed help, with our joint account that paid rent and utilities, and with my sister Lisa's wedding details when she asked us to host the post-ceremony dinner. Our intimacy was practical and constant: shared keys, shared passwords, shared grocery lists. That is why when little slips started to happen, I shrugged them off at first. Bills I did not recognize would ping my email, and Mateo would say, "Not to worry, he had it." He began taking phone calls in the yard after I went to work. He told me he was closing freelance contracts. He promised to talk about a change in our savings plan after dinner, but failed to follow up twice, then 3 times. The first time I noticed a gap in the bank alerts, I blamed my own exhaustion. The second time, I found a printed receipt for a contractor I had never met and accepted his explanation that he had been fixing a leak without waking me. The third time, my sister asked me, quietly and horribly, if everything at home was all right. I told her yes, because the idea of confronting Mateo felt impossible. Then that Sunday at Lisa's rehearsal dinner, I overheard Mateo on the phone in the kitchen, voice softer than he ever used with me, making plans that did not include our shared schedule. I finished my plate of salad mechanically and felt a coldness under my ribs that I could not name. At first, it was the small things, tiny disturbances that scraped against the smooth narrative I had constructed about our life together. I started cataloging them like one catalogs receipts: the mug in the sink that wasn't ours, the extra set of keys he tucked under a potted fern, the stray business card in his coat pocket for a real estate agent I had never heard him mention. Each small offbeat note felt like a single wrong note in a song we had learned by heart. I had always believed in rhythms as proof of constancy. His voicemail greeting that ended with the same silly joke, the way he bent the corner of a page in a novel he meant to return to, the steady ritual of taking out the recycling on Thursday night. When those beats stumbled, I tried to ignore it because the alternative was to listen to the silence that followed. After the rehearsal dinner, I started trying to solve the problem on my own the way I always had, with lists, receipts, and conversations. I combed through our bank statements and found odd transfers to a business name I did not recognize. I saved screenshots of transaction alerts to a folder and left them on my laptop where Mateo could see me open it. I asked him about one payment and he smiled and said it was a surprise for my birthday, then added too quickly that I should not worry my mother with our finances. I tried again at our next Thursday pasta night and asked whether he had moved any of the savings we were keeping for fertility appointments. He grew defensive and said that I was being paranoid, that spreadsheets did not make sense in the middle of an argument, and that I should trust him. Trust, he said, was what allowed us to sleep at night. This is the exact sort of thing people tell you in other stories, with sunshine and neat resolutions. But here, trust became elastic, not the comforting rope it had always been, but a rubber band stretched thin. I called my bank and asked for a general explanation of the transfers and was told they were legitimate payments to a property company. They could not share details without authorization. My efforts to get clarity pushed me into a pattern of small victories and larger setbacks. I learned that one of the deposits had been moved to a mortgage lender. I found an email thread about a closing scheduled 2 months from now in a folder named with a nickname only Mateo used when he was excited. Little domestic markers that once comforted me started to look like clues in an investigation. The way he had stopped calling when he was 5 minutes late, the new calendar entries on our shared app that merely said review with no further note. I began to sleep less and to wake with that coldness under my ribs that tasted of unfinished conversations. I confronted him again in the kitchen, my voice shaking, and he accused me of prying, of turning family stress into theater. Lisa noticed my exhaustion and offered to sit with me while I reviewed paperwork, but when I asked her to come to a meeting with Mateo, she hemmed and hawed, afraid of picking sides. Our home became a pressure cooker where familiar routines turned into guilt tests. He would call me from the garage and say he had put away groceries. I would find zippers ripped on bags in the closet, and he would say he was cleaning. Underneath, something bigger moved, a contract signed in our name without my knowledge that changed our ownership stake in the house. The sense of betrayal deepened because every deception used the small intimacies we shared, my signature on a permit, the fact I left my laptop unlocked, the trust that I would not read Mateo's mail. There are moments in relationships that feel like hinge points. For me, one came on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I opened our calendar to check a dentist appointment, and there, written in Mateo's tidy looping, was a note I had seen him make 1,000 times: Thursday pasta, Lisa rehearses, doctor. Beneath it, in the same confident hand, was an unfamiliar line: our new start. The ink had bled slightly at the end of the pen tip, like he had written it in a hurry and then crossed the street to another life. I kept staring at that phrase until the letters blurred. That single entry reframed everything for me. It suggested intention, a plan mapped where only our daily domesticity had been mapped before. I tried to imagine walking away. I could not yet. Our banking was entwined, my career still required the stability of the house, and my mother relied on me to coordinate doctors. Every time I threatened to leave the room in anger, he begged me to stay and said we could work this out, and I wanted to believe him because the memory of our cheap Pinot and our shared plans felt like a tether. At night I lay awake, rehearsing the conversation in the voice I used to talk about mundane things to my mother, measured, ordinary, and therefore believable. That voice had served me before. It carved through family tension like a slowly sharpening knife. As I pushed for answers, the situation broke open and then it collapsed. My method was quiet documentation and a timed reveal. I printed bank summaries, saved email headers, and collected a stack of text message screenshots. I discovered that Mateo had been quietly negotiating to transfer a portion of our home equity into a new buyer arrangement, one that would free him and saddle me with a smaller share and new monthly obligations. It was financial deception inside the household, enabled by the routines that made us one unit: our joint account, my automatic signatures, our assumption that we consulted each other. When I looked at the copies of the agreements under the kitchen light, the numbers swam: percentages reallocated, signatures, dates. He had arranged things in ways that would only be visible once a closing date drew near. I invited Mateo to talk with Lisa present, hoping her presence would steady him and force honesty. Instead, he lied calmly in front of us. He said the paperwork was about consolidating repairs and that he had discussed everything with me when I had been working late. Lisa, startled and loyal to both of us, faltered and eventually left the room saying she needed air. That night, family gatherings became tests of allegiance. My mother, who had always adored Mateo for the way he listened to her stories, started to accept his version because he painted me as stressed and unreliable, a woman making mountains out of molehills. Friends of ours texted gentle messages asking if I had checked the mortgage details. The lowest point arrived 3 weeks later when Mateo staged a meeting with our banker and presented a signed amendment to our arrangement. He had forged my permission by forging the initial of my name on a form he said I had approved over the phone. When you are gaslit by someone you love, the world rearranges itself to make you doubt your own compass. I showed our mother the stack of screenshots and the strange signature, and she reacted with exhaustion. She told me I had to calm down, that perhaps I had misunderstood, that paperwork could be confusing. She meant to soothe me, but her words landed like a verdict. I felt isolated, accused of being hysterical, and unable to access accounts without his cooperation because he had changed passwords. I was trapped in the home that no longer felt like mine, and in a relationship that used our shared routines to squeeze me out slowly. I began to consider legal consultation but feared escalation. More than money, I was losing my place in the family and the belief that the life we had planned would happen. I spent nights on the living room couch with a legal packet bookmarked and my hands worrying the frayed edge of a throw pillow. The pillow had the faded imprint of his shoulder where he used to fall asleep reading. Sometimes I would rest my head on that fabric and let memories come like a tide: his laughter at some ridiculous ad, the way he would stand at the window and draw the blinds wider if the sunlight made the rug too warm. Those images made my resolve waver. I decided my final attempt would be measured and public. I scheduled a family meeting at the kitchen table, the very place where we had once turned grocery lists into long-term plans, and I brought my evidence: bank transaction summaries, dated screenshots, the contractor receipt that did not match any repair we had agreed on, and an email thread with the closing date where Mateo had misspelled a family routine detail that he had never gotten wrong before: the shorthand for our Thursday pasta. That small mistake seeded doubt in me weeks earlier, and now it became important. He had contradicted a tiny daily routine, and I had kept that contradiction like a breadcrumb. I printed an index, placed documents in neat stacks, and practiced the tone I would use: calm, plain, inexorable. My heart hammered, but my hands did not shake. My lawful revenge mechanism was a controlled, calm reveal in front of the family and a request for mediated accountability. I invited our banker and a family mediator I trusted. I told the story in the voice I had used with my mother when talking about mundane things. I laid out our timeline, the shared rituals, and how each trust anchor had been used. I showed the forged initial to the banker and asked for an explanation. Mateo, who had always been quick with charm, tried one last lie. He said the signature was mine because I had texted him consent. The banker pulled up a time-stamped authorization request that had been sent to an email address only one of us used, and Mateo could not explain why the authorization had come after he claimed I had consented. My sister, who had been unsure before, placed her hand on mine and said she had been watching quietly because she could not bring herself to accuse her brother without proof. The mediator called for a pause and steered the conversation toward concrete consequences: an immediate freeze on any transfer, legal review of the paperwork, and a plan to decouple our finances gradually so I retained a fair share of the house. The family dynamic shifted in that room. The people I worried would take his side began to ask careful questions, and the narrative he had spun started to fray. Mateo's motive, it turned out, was fear of stagnation and a desire to buy a new life without the slow negotiations he said living with me required. That did not excuse the betrayal, but it explained why he had used our shared routines to hide a plan. He argued, brows knit, about futures and opportunities, about how he felt hemmed in by the plans we had jointly made. I remember the way his voice cracked when he tried to make earnestness sound like reason. The consequences were real and the payoff was deliberate. Legally, the banker and mediator arranged for a temporary injunction against any transfer until attorneys reviewed the documents, and we opened separate accounts with new boundaries that I managed. Socially, I reclaimed my place in the family by telling the truth calmly. Lisa and my mother apologized for their doubt and for the pressure they had put on me to be small and quiet. Mateo moved out within weeks, not because I had wanted him to suffer, but because the house could no longer hold a person who had weaponized our intimacy. My revenge was not dramatic humiliation. It was the restoration of boundaries and the correction of the ownership record so our future plans were mine again to shape. In the months that followed, I let the small rituals reacclimate me to being alone in a house that felt whole again. Thursday pasta became mine again, this time cooked by me and shared with friends who knew the history. I reclaimed the paper calendar Mateo had always updated and hung it in the hallway where anyone could see the appointments I added. The twist that closed the story was a small family tradition taking center stage. The paper calendar Mateo always updated with our appointments. The one he had once prided himself on keeping nailed behind his desk had an inked note dated the week before the closing that read in Mateo's looping script, "Our new start." That contradiction of routine had been the breadcrumb I held onto, and in the family meeting it became proof that he had planned the change before he told anyone. I felt vindicated but not triumphant in a hateful way. I had been betrayed by the person I trusted most, and the truth returned my dignity. My new normal involved stricter boundaries, separate accounts, and a house that was legally and emotionally mine. I was bruised, but I had learned how to protect the life I had built, and that protection, more than any revenge, felt like the final, necessary act of love for myself.